Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mena Grand Prix Formula One podcast. It's been a little while since we last caught up, but we are back today with a new episode. I am Maram once again speaking to you with my friend and co-host Mark Hamilton. Mark, how are you? How have you been?
I'm amazing. I think the kids, Maram, say it's been a minute. I think that's the expression that young people say. It's been a minute.
It has been, yeah.
We're back. I was in Europe. You were in Asia. You and I haven't spoken since you got back from Malaysia. But please, how was that trip? Was it fun? Was it everything you expected it to be?
So, yes, it was. It was, Mark. Just to let you know, Mark and I were at the completely different sides of the world. I was in Asia, he was in Europe. We were 15 hours away, so communicating wasn't always easy. So today, for the first time in weeks, I finally had the chance to sit down and tell Mark all about my travels. And yes, it was fantastic. Malaysia is so beautiful, Mark. This country hosted an F1 race in the past. The last Grand Prix held here in Sepang International Circuit was in 2017 and was won by Max Verstappen. And I just thought it would be cool to share some background information about this country since I just got back from there. But yeah, we attended my brother's graduation. He graduated from university. So the whole family went there to celebrate him. And it was great to finally be able to visit his university and meet his friends. And we had a lot of fun.
First of all, congratulations to your brother and your entire family.
Thank you.
That's a huge milestone. But I love the fact that rather than sharing the population of Malaysia or the GDP of Malaysia they had a Formula One race at Sepang until 2017.
That is the important information.
That's why people are tuning into this show. That track was awesome. I miss it sorely. And of course, I think the challenge was economically. It was tough to have both a race in Malaysia and in Singapore. But that track was something very special. My memory, though, my strongest memory of that was 2016. Nico and Lewis fighting race after race after race to be the Formula One world champion. And Lewis had an engine failure at that track where a burst of flames came out of the back of that car. He scored 0 points and it ultimately cost him the 2016 championship. But that's kind of my ongoing memory of that circuit. But welcome back. Now, since you and I have been enjoying our summer break, our summer holiday, jetting all over the world, we've had 2 Formula One races. We had a race at Spa, which I think is one of your favorite tracks on the calendar.
It is.
And then we had a race at Hungary. So maybe we spent a couple of minutes. I think we can kind of quickly revisit those, but then I want to get to the topic of the day, which is everything related to the Ferrari experience this year. But maybe if you're cool with it, a quick recap of Belgium, some highlights or memories that you have from that race, and maybe the same from Hungary.
Yes, of course. So it's not really the Belgian Grand Prix if it doesn't rain for at least one session. And that's exactly what happened at this year's race. Heavy rain delayed the starts by more than an hour, but eventually we did go racing and we were able to execute a full race with full points awarded. Oscar Piastri won the Belgian Grand Prix, followed by teammate Lando Norris. Charles Leclerc finished in third. The Belgian Grand Prix was a sprint weekend, the third sprint weekend this year. Max Verstappen won the sprint race, Oscar Piastri came in second, Lando Norris in third. So in Spa, Oscar Piastri had the advantage in points, but in Hungary it was his teammate Lando Norris who won the race and had the advantage. Charles Leclerc surprisingly started on pole and had quite a good one in the first few laps of the race, but unfortunately his strategy didn't play out in his favor. For some reason he lost so many positions and ended up losing the lead and dropping to P4 out of the podium. Lando Norris, after a great strategy and a fast pit stop by McLaren, won the race by a very small margin over his teammates. Overall, it was a very intense race and the fight lasted up until the last lap, so I enjoyed it. And now we have quite a long break before the next race in Zandvoort, but the fight is getting more powerful every weekend. Only 9 points separate the McLaren teammates, and can't wait to see how it will unfold in Zandvoort. Mark, any thoughts on the Belgian Grand Prix and the Hungarian Grand Prix? That was a very simplified recap.
Concise.
A very simplified recap, but do you have anything else to add?
No, it would have taken me 20 minutes to share the same amount of information that you did. The one thing that was kind of interesting, and by the way, I always forget and almost dread sprint weekends, but the I think the social media account for the Dutch Grand Prix had accidentally broken the news that the 6 sprint weekends next year will be China, Miami, Canada, Great Britain, the Netherlands, and Singapore. They quickly deleted that post, but it looks like we now have some pretty good insight into where they're going to be next year. So again, China, that's cool. Miami, that's cool. Canada, that'll be the first sprint weekend. Sprint race is back in the UK. I wish it was this year because I would have been able to see the sprint race. The Netherlands and Singapore. So that's pretty cool. Now, the one thing that I did want to talk to you about, and this is kind of linking the Hungarian Grand Prix experience to the main topic today, which is Ferrari. And for those of you that remember, Charles Leclerc scored his first pole of the season. He was ahead of the 2 McLarens. And there's a lot of conversation about the fact that, hey, maybe it was an issue of crosswinds. It was windy conditions during Q3. And I think that the McLarens tend to ride a little bit higher than the Ferrari, which means that if it is windy, they're a little bit more unsettled, and that may have cost them the time, and it may have worked in the advantage of Charles Leclerc, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All that to say, I had been saying to other people in the weeks leading up to the Hungarian Grand Prix that if Ferrari was going to score a race win this year, it was going to be in Hungary. And the principal reason for that is that this track is incredibly challenging to overtake at. That really, there's really one opportunity. And as the race progresses, you have that opportunity in that long start stretch where you race down from turn 14 to turn 1. You overtake late in turn 1, and then you're good to go. Like, that's really the only opportunity. So my thought was, hey, if Ferrari could get a surprise pole here or qualify on the front row and they can get past a McLaren early, maybe this is the one place on the calendar where they could score that desperately needed race win this year. And everything was setting up to make that possible, right? That Charles Leclerc scores a pole, and we'll talk about Lewis Hamilton in a minute because he didn't get out of Q2 after not getting out of Q3 in Belgium. But he qualifies on pole, and for the first stint, or maybe the first 2 stints, it looked like he was possibly going to keep the McLarens behind him. And it almost seemed in a way that the McLaren team were resigned to the fact that, hey, you know what, we're still going to score a ton of points here, and this is an exception, and we'll be back on top next weekend or the next race in Zandvoort. But all of a sudden, his performance just craters, and he falls behind not just one McLaren, but 2 McLarens, and then he falls behind George Russell, and then he does finish P4, but he finishes 20 seconds behind George Russell and 40 seconds behind the race winner. And there's been rampant speculation since then as to what exactly happened. And the explanation from Ferrari that weekend was like, well, there was an issue with the chassis, or the chassis was damaged, or the chassis was defective. And I'm just like, I'm not a technician, I'm not a mechanic, but I don't understand that explanation, that how could you roll a chassis out, a monocoque tub, a chassis out into a Grand Prix weekend that was compromised in some way? And if it was compromised, shouldn't it have been compromised right from the first lap? Like, what happened? And then people started kind of pulling the thread here. And while it's not immediately clear as to what happened this weekend, I think that George Russell had made some comments post-race that were very telling. And he made a comment to the effect of, hey, they're not going to tell you, or something, that car was illegal. And his imposition was that perhaps Ferrari, desperate to score a race win here, was running the car too low. And this car has major suspension issues, and we've known that from the beginning of the year. And one of the ways that it circumvents the challenges with the suspension is they run the car low. However, when they run the car low, they risk being disqualified because they wear away so much plank, which is exactly what happened in China. So it sounds as though this team was so desperate, possibly for a race win, that they were willing to throw caution to the wind and run the car in a lower configuration than they should have. And that at some point during the race, they began to realize that the plank was wearing away at a rate that may have led to a disqualification. So it sounds like during a tire change, they put on new tires that had more pressure in the hope that they would raise the car, and that would limit the amount of wear to the plank. And again, this is all very speculative. I'm just putting things together based on what we've heard and what we've read. But it sounds like they went with a very low ride height, and you could see this car was sparking everywhere. But when they put on the new tires with the higher tire pressure, he lost a ton of grip, especially in the corners. And you could hear Charles Leclerc screaming at his team, I wanted to do it my way. I wanted to do it my way. He was implying that there was a shared or known issue with the car, and that he had an alternative way to go about kind of reconciling that issue. And it sounds like what Charles wanted to do was simply lift and coast in some of those corners where there are very abrasive curbs, and the team decided, no, we're just going to put on tires with more pressure, which is going to compromise your grip. Meanwhile, you could also hear on Lewis's radio that he was constantly being told to lift and coast, lift and coast, lift and coast. All that to say, he qualifies on pole. He looks sensational through the first 10 or 20 laps, and then his performance absolutely craters off the face of the planet. I don't know about you, Maram, but something very odd happened during that race. Do you want to jump in on the speculation game and throw caution to the wind as I did and speculate as to what happened during this Grand Prix? Maybe you have a different take than I do.
Yes, so Charles Leclerc was visibly upset. We heard him complain on the radio. He was not happy. But then right after the race, during the interview, he seemed surprisingly calm, and he started saying that it was something to do with the chassis. It was not what I had thought. I thought it was something else, but turns out it had to do with the chassis. So I think the tire pressure theory is very plausible. So Ferrari had been disqualified before for excessive plank wear, and this is something that they did not want it to repeat again in Hungary, especially after starting from pole. So it does seem like Ferrari did pump more pressure into Charles Leclerc's tire to prevent him from wearing his plank too much. Another theory I heard that he might have picked up some damage at some point during the race that might have compromised his race and caused him to fall almost 1 second per lap. It's all very interesting, and I'm sure Ferrari won't go on and point out any other, they won't go and give out any explanations, because they do not want the FIA to investigate into that. They do not want the FIA to start an investigation over a possible excessive plank wear. But I do think that what you explained might have been the case. Ferrari might have been pumping, or might have pumped extra pressure into Charles Leclerc's tire to raise the car and stop him from wearing his plank to the point where he would get disqualified.
It's a mouthful to say a lot of these terms altogether. I agree. And the reason I think this is, you look at his qualifying performance, clearly the McLarens were a little unsettled by the crosswinds, and the Ferrari wasn't. And I've seen some very technical photos that just showed how much lower the Ferrari was than the McLarens in qualifying, and I thought that was interesting. So that might explain why he put in a better time in qualifying, because he wasn't struggling with the crosswinds because the car was as unsettled. And then he goes into the race, and one thing that you can absolutely see, Maram, and this was obvious during the race, was that car was throwing up a ton of sparks. And it throws up sparks because at certain points the suspension compresses farther than intended, the car bottoms out, and it spews sparks. But it was sparking more than any other car. So maybe the hope was like, hey, let's get him out in clean air, enable him to build up a huge lead, and then at some point during the race, we're going to put him on tires that have more tire pressure to raise the car up quickly enough that he hasn't worn away too much plank that would lead to a disqualification. And if that was the strategy, well, unfortunately it backfired, because in putting him on those overinflated tires, he lost a ton of grip, and then he subsequently lost a ton of time, and he obviously finished well off the podium. And I know on paper in the race classification, P4 doesn't seem so bad, but when you look at that delta, the 40 seconds between him and Lando, and the 20 seconds between him and George, is pretty egregious. Now, before we kind of quickly jump over, because I want to get your take on the championship battle now between Oscar and Lando, but before we do this, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis in Belgium, quick recap, he doesn't get out of Q3. He qualifies, I think, P17. He's heartbroken. He puts in an absolutely sensational race in those wet conditions that you mentioned to finish P7. In Hungary, he doesn't get out of Q2. Now, admittedly, he only missed Q3 by 0.2 of a second. So had he gotten there, who knows what could have happened, but he doesn't get out of Q2. But because this is such a difficult track to overtake at, he basically starts P12, finishes P12. And he sounded, Maram, despondent when he was being interviewed after qualifying, saying, quote unquote, I'm absolutely useless, and then further seems to infer that the team should replace him, which I'm sure that at some point these comments start to become demoralizing for the entire team. But he was very, very, very upset. are we right to panic about where Lewis is? Because really, the only gauge of how good or poor he's been this year is that of his teammate. But this week, his teammate qualifies on pole, finishes P4. He doesn't get out of Q2, finishes P12. Should we be worried, or is this just part of a transitionary period for Lewis where he needs to get used to the team and the car? Or does none of this matter because next year it's going to be a completely new car anyways that will be potentially, presumably, built around Lewis's strengths? I'd love your take on this because the internet is alive with concern and speculation about where Sir Lewis is currently with Ferrari.
Yeah, so like you said, Mark, Lewis made some very disheartening remarks after qualifying in Hungary. He called himself useless, which is something that doesn't come often out of a 7-time world champion. So it is very hard to see Lewis Hamilton, who's always had a positive outlook on things, who always seemed to be very confident even when things went wrong. It's hard to see him like this. And I don't think Lewis actually meant any of this. I don't think he really wants to leave the team or the sport or anything. And I think that interview might have just got him in a moment of frustration. It's certainly not easy to see your teammates start the race in pole when you fail to even make it to the top 10. There comes a moment of doubt where you look at your own results compared to your teammate and you start thinking, is it really me? Am I the problem here? Maybe that's what happened with Lewis. Since the start of the season, Lewis has only outperformed Leclerc twice. And we're already halfway through the season, so people are beginning to wonder if he's ever going to get a podium this season. And I do believe he will get a podium. I may be a little delusional here, but Lewis is a 7-time world champion, and I'm sure he'll come out of this. And historically, drivers have struggled and then had great comebacks. So I think all Lewis needs to do is just sit down with his team and try to understand this team a little better. I think Lewis may still not be very familiar with how things work at Ferrari. There's always trouble communicating between the driver and the team. We've heard on the radio that sometimes the team doesn't give Lewis the information he's looking for. So when Lewis and Ferrari overcome these troubles, I do believe that it will become a lot easier to drive, knowing that you have a team that's got your back and understands you very well. And of course, I don't blame the lack of communication for all the troubles Lewis has faced with Ferrari. I do think he has committed some errors at certain races, but that doesn't mean that there won't come a race this season where Lewis doesn't finally understand this car and put it on the podium.
Maram, I love everything that you're saying, and I would just add a couple of things. One is that last weekend, after the Hungarian Grand Prix qualifying, Sam Bird on the BBC Checkered Flag podcast had made this incredible observation. He said, look, Ferrari, so quickly I'll state, the Ferrari car isn't perfect. It has some fundamental flaws. They reinvented the car this year. They made what was a very good car a bad car, and one of the biggest issues is the suspension. That aside, obviously Charles Leclerc is getting more out of it than Lewis is, but Sam Bird on the BBC Checkered Flag podcast said, look, everybody at Ferrari knows what the issue is. And the issue, according to Sam Bird, is that Lewis is specifically struggling with trail braking in this car. And trail braking is the process of not riding the brakes through a corner, but gently riding the brakes into the corner and then transitioning to steering out of it. And they said that this is the biggest issue that Lewis is having. Everybody knows that's the issue he's having. And rather than trying to address that core issue, they've tried to compensate in other ways with the setup of the car. And unfortunately, in trying to subsidize or compensate for the issue, they've actually made the issue worse, because every time they change the car to compensate for his kind of challenges with trail braking, it has a knock-on effect. So they seem to understand at least what Lewis's challenges with this car is. But they also said something else that I thought was very interesting. They said, look, Lewis was wildly successful in the previous era, so from 2014 to 2021, and we switched in 2022 to cars that generate downforce through ground effects on the bottom of the car. And for whatever reason, and obviously Mercedes weren't queuing up a great car in 23 to 24, but Lewis obviously did better with the previous generation of car. And if you look at the cars that we're going to see next year, Maram, they've largely now done away with the underbody ground effects to generate downforce. And in some ways, next year's cars might have more in common with the previous generation than they do the current generation. So the benefit to Lewis is next year he's a car that he might be instinctively just more comfortable driving, but also a car that he would have been actively involved in developing, right? That he had no input into this car. He couldn't even speak to a technician at Ferrari until January of this year, right? So Ferrari spent all last year building this car that Lewis was going to drive without being able to talk to him about it. So I have a tremendous amount of optimism that he's going to be better next year and much closer to the mark established by Charles Leclerc. But I would add, and Jean Alesi had made these comments a couple of days ago, those comments that he made, and I love Lewis. I love his authenticity. I love his transparency. For crying out loud, I named my son after him. Those type of comments aren't helpful to team dynamic, right? That if I'm back at the factory or if I'm in the garage and I'm hearing those comments, even though they're not a personal criticism of me, and Lewis is more being critical of his own ability to extract performance from this car, it's just demoralizing. And it's this kind of balance between, hey, I want to be honest and authentic with the fans, but at the same time, you almost want to be a little bit guarded at times. Like, hey, it wasn't a great weekend. I didn't get enough out of this car. Shout out to everybody in the garage and everybody back at the factory. We got the summer. I'm going to spend some time in the sim, but he sounds so demoralized right now. And unfortunately, that feeds his critics and it gives them things to criticize and talk about, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think the second half is going to be a lot better for Lewis. I think Charles will continue to outperform him, but I think that this year is not necessarily a fair gauge of what he's going to be able to demonstrate next year, because I think he's going to bounce back in a big way, especially if this car is competitive. Maram, one last topic before we jump off here. In Hungary, McLaren scored its 200th Grand Prix victory, which is pretty amazing. They've now had a 1-2 finish, and I think 4 of the last 4 races, so I guess 4 straight races where they finished 1-2. And Oscar Piastri has now scored 3 wins in the last 4 Grand Prix, and I think he's now just 9 points behind Oscar Piastri. So there was a point this season, Maram, where I thought Oscar was going to run away with this, that he might finish 30 or 40 points up the road. But we're going to go into the final 10 races of the season, and it's going to be tight. Do you have a prediction now, knowing that Oscar seems to be, not Oscar, well, Oscar's great, but that Lando seems to have recovered his form in a big way?
You know, Mark, we're not supposed to have biases here. We're supposed to be pretty neutral, but I have always supported Oscar just because I've been following up with his career ever since he was in F3. So I just feel a lot of pride in seeing him fight for the championship now. So I do believe that he will win in Zandvoort, quite selfishly because I support him. I do believe that he will win this championship. But you're right. He is still leading the championship, but Lando Norris is only 9 points behind him in P2 right now. So Lando Norris does seem to have something to say about this, because every weekend he gets closer to his teammate. And even though I think Piastri is more consistent, but Norris is still a very sharp and great driver, and he will not let Oscar run away with this championship as easily as we thought. And I just cannot wait to see who will be on top in Zandvoort, because every weekend something happens that adds more to the championship, and you start to wonder. Because like you said, at some point you might think that Oscar might be running away with it, but then next weekend Lando Norris comes and says that no, I will take the lead this weekend and I will score more points. And at this rate, if Lando Norris wins next race, I believe he will be leading the championship. So at this rate, we might see Norris lead at some point, but then again, the race after, we might see Piastri on top. So I do believe that this championship is going to carry on till the end of the season. And I can't wait to see who will be on top until then.
I just hope it goes right down to the wire and the champion is decided.
Oh, me too.
Me too. In Abu Dhabi. That's what we all want to see. As a quick reminder, by the way, I think there was a point this summer where Oscar was leading by 22 points. So Lando's been able to chip away at that lead, and he's got it down now to, I think, about 9 points. If you want a quick preview at the second part of the season, we have the Dutch Grand Prix, which you mentioned a couple of minutes ago at Zandvoort, coming up on August 31st. The next weekend, we're at Monza, which is one of my favorite circuits, one of the great power circuits in the entire world of motorsports. We then have a 2-week break, and then we're at Baku. Everyone loves Baku. It's such a fun street circuit. We've then got 2 weeks off, and we're we're in Singapore. We then have 2 weeks off, and we're in Austin, and this is where it gets a little bit fast and furious. So we're in Austin on the 19th of October, followed by Mexico City on the 26th. Then we've got 2 weeks, and we're in Brazil, and then 2 weeks after that, we're in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is the beginning of an intense triple header that wraps up the season. So we're in Vegas on the 22nd of November. Then we're at Doha at Lusail in Qatar on November 30th, and then the season wraps up in Abu Dhabi, as always, and I think as it has since 2009, at Yas Marina Circuit in Abu Dhabi, one of my favorite places in all of the world. So we're going into the final stretch of the season, Maram. The championship is super tight. We know McLaren's going to win the constructors, but at this point, I don't think even Max Verstappen could salvage a drivers' championship, especially after that result in Hungary. But it's going to come down to Oscar. It's going to come down to Lando, and it's not necessarily just going to be the physical process of going out in that race car, but it's going to be a psychological battle between the two of them. And for all of us fans at home, this is amazing. Maram, before we wrap up, I know that you and I have got a couple of shows lined up during the summer break, but anything else you wanted to comment on regarding McLaren or just F1 generally?
Yeah, I love that we have officially reached this stage of the season where we start to wonder what will happen at the end, because like you said, we are close to wrapping up the European leg of the season. We have Zandvoort, and then we have Monza, but then we go to the American leg of the season, where we have Brazil and Mexico. So I can't believe we are, and it's so great to be this. To have reached this stage of the season and to have come this far into the season without knowing who will definitely win the championship. So I love that Oscar and Lando are keeping us all on our toes. And I love that up until now, there still isn't a definitive winner, because it just tells you how exciting this season is going. And yeah, I think that's it. Like we said, we go back to Zandvoort after summer break, and I would just like to remind you all that Zandvoort features an F1 Academy race. So we will be back with our special F1 Academy segment with a special guest, and I can't wait for all of you to listen to our interview. We have something really exciting coming up, so stay tuned. In the meantime, make sure to follow us on social media. Check our other shows, including Grand Prix Talk on YouTube. We have some great content there. And I think that's it. Mark, anything else to add?
Amazing. No, this was amazing. Thank you so much, Maram. And I apologize, everyone, that we took a minute between podcasts, but we're back. We're going to have some fun during the summer break. And I cannot wait to kick off the second half of the season. It's going to be pretty special, Maram. And I think we're all going to see some really great F1. Like Maram said, make sure you follow us on social media. If you listen to our show on Spotify, please give us a rating. And if you listen on Apple Music, which is also amazing, please give us a rating and a review. It means the world to both of us. Until next time, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. We'll talk to you all again soon. Bye for now.
Talk soon. Goodbye.